Okay, and we're live, but not really live. But today is our first time with a special guest. First time doing it not face to face. But today we have James Dinicolantonio. If you guys aren't familiar with James, he's a scientist. He'll tell you more about himself, but he's a scientist. He's an author. He's really big on Instagram right now. He's got like 500,000 followers. Everyone is always constantly reposting his stuff, sharing his stuff. Just a really interesting guy. And I love his kind of philosophy of just making everything simple. Like the answer isn't in medicine. The answer isn't in, drugs. It's, sometimes like he always says, like sunlight and, just being outside and eating whole foods. It's just like a simplistic approach. So tell us about your background, James.
Yeah, well, I mean, interestingly enough, like our paths sort of crossed in our younger years. So actually, I started wrestling in Lockport Kids Club with Brian Needle, like back when I was like 7 years old. So like that's kind of like where I get my passion for sports and athleticism and things like that. And then went to the University of Buffalo, but I trained in judo, Kempo karate as well, and ran cross country. And I mean, I wasn't like amazing at wrestling. I was a division champion, but I only did 1 year in high school because by the time I was like in high school, I was already so burnt out from wrestling, like for 8 years. You know how that goes.
Right. Yeah, of course.
So I focused more on like lifting weights in high school and like more cardio, things like that. And so I graduated from the University of Buffalo with my doctorate of pharmacy. And I also am a cardiovascular research scientist. And so I've published, about 300 academic papers, mostly on nutrients and nutraceuticals and food and how that affects our health.
What's a nutraceutical?
It's basically just a supplement. It's just like a fancy word of saying a supplement.
Okay.
Yeah. And I'm also the associate editor for the largest open access cardiology journal in the UK. It's called BMJ Open Heart. So I focus, a lot of my research focuses on cardiovascular health, and really that's kind of how I got into salt and, writing this book as well for performance.
So that's kind of where I wanted to jump right into that. Salt. That was the first like kind of mainstream publication or book that you've kind of put out.
Yeah. First mainstream book was the Salt Fix, and that didn't have a whole lot to do with athletic performance. It was mostly on like, does salt increase the risk of high blood pressure and cardiovascular disease and things like that. So if someone's looking into wants to know more on that topic, then the Salt Fix definitely covers that very well. But if you want to learn how to actually take salt to improve performance, then obviously Win is, it's got 50 pages on just hydration itself.
So when I was doing the research for this episode, I looked just general background information for you, but the Salt Fix, it did have, we always talk about the haters, like Caitlin has plenty of haters and other guests, but Salt Fix had some criticism. What do you have to say? Like, what do you think about that? People who say that, you shouldn't eat that much salt or the salt's bad for you. Like your big thing, it seems to me, is that sugar is the culprit for salt's problems.
I think so. Basically, you have about 80% of people with normal blood pressure are not salt sensitive. 75% of people with pre-hypertension are not salt sensitive. And even 55% of people with high blood pressure are not salt sensitive. So to have blanket statements for the entire population that everybody should, consume a low salt diet clearly makes no sense, particularly for an athlete. So if you switch over from processed foods, which are high in salt, to natural whole foods, that's going to be low in salt because we no longer consume the blood and the interstitial fluid of the animal. So we've lost the salt. So if you're eating real foods, you have to replace that back. And that's really kind of the crux of the book, as well as if someone is salt sensitive, there's three main factors that actually cause that. Typically low potassium intake, low magnesium intake, or insulin resistance due to high refined carbs and high sugar intake. So if you fix those things, most people can handle a normal salt intake just fine.
Yeah. Cause it seems that, you're not saying like to put salt on the regular American diet. You're not saying to salt your French fries and salt your chips. You're saying to salt, your tomato slices or steak, right? Is that accurate?
Exactly. I mean, basically don't blame salt for what the sugar did. And when you go on like a low carb diet, or if you are, an athlete, you automatically increase your needs for salt. So it's very nuanced, and like you basically have to, you just blanket statements that everyone should be on a low salt diet just makes no sense.
Right.
I always laugh like, I'm interested in all this stuff, but I'm not smart when it comes to all this. So I think if I kind of get something, or if I think something sounds crazy, then it's pretty obvious. But I always laugh. We're huge into steak. We love making steak, and same thing with, just for a taste purpose, we love putting salt on everything when we cook. And like some of, I have friends that are like, oh, I don't know how you eat all that salt. I'm like, wait, you're eating like frappuccinos
It's
from
just
Starbucks.
it's hidden. The junk is hidden in their stuff.
Yeah, I think that they're like, it's almost like, wow, you're brainwashed. Like, it's just as soon as you hear salt, they're like, well, I need to eat healthier. I mean, this has too much salt in it. And I was like, I mean, salt's like the least. I mean, this is me not super educated or understanding anything. I'm like, wait, you think you're like not losing weight, or you're a little unhealthy because you have salt on your steak, but then you eat like, processed like sugars and like cereals and like, Quest bars and stuff like that. And I'm like, wait, sometimes I'm like, wait, am I crazy? I'm like, but that's what the majority of people think. It's almost like you just hear it all the time, that you don't know the answer. You don't understand why you're saying it, but you just believe it all of a sudden. And it's kind of, sometimes as I get older, I'm like, it's kind of crazy how like people are brainwashed with these blanket statements.
Yeah, totally. I mean, you're 100% right. Like, you almost don't want to speak good about salt in front of people, because they're going to totally be like, what are you talking about? Salt's going to kill me. My doctor always says to lower my salt intake. But really, it's the refined carbs and sugar that increases insulin, which is a hormone that causes you to over retain salt. So if you drop the refined carbs and sugars, you'll lower insulin levels and you'll start actually spilling salt out in the kidneys.
It's funny because like when you explain something like that, it sounds complicated. But I love your Instagram posts where it's just like, instead of eating pastries and muffins, eat steak and eggs. Like, that is so easy to follow. And I think it's such a solution, but there's no science behind that. Be like, don't eat this muffin, eat this orange, right? Or whatever. The simplicity of your lists and things that you put out on Instagram, I think that's why you're doing so well, I think, on Instagram, because it's so easily digestible. Like, everyone understands what you're saying.
Yeah, I think, trying to match how we used to consume foods ancestrally makes a whole lot of sense. If we evolved over 2.6 million years consuming meat and animal foods and some plant foods, don't get me wrong, but I don't think from a caloric standpoint, plant foods contributed a whole lot. I mean, it depended obviously on geographical regions, but to demonize like a food that's been around for 2.6 million years in the, basically evolutionary intakes, I think is just, it just doesn't make sense.
Right. Now, that's funny with the ancestral reference. Are you familiar with Liver King on Instagram? Yeah. How extreme should you go with that ancestral tendencies? Like he's like eating, like basically I think like a raw, basically carnivore-ish diet. I mean, that's too extreme, right? Or wrong?
Well, it depends how you're sourcing your animal foods, because liver can have parasites in it, and other organs can have parasites. So if you don't cook your food, you're potentially risking that. Although there are certain companies that will test and make sure their products don't contain anything like that. So I think you're risking other, obviously E. coli and things like that too. So I definitely always cook my food. I'm like a medium guy for a steak, but I don't eat my meat raw.
But do you eat organs?
I do. I eat organ blends, liver and heart.
Okay.
Yep.
That seems to be like trending a lot now. Like, why is that so important?
Yeah, well, because muscle meat is very low in a mineral called copper. And it has very high amounts of iron, and you have to match the two, because copper helps us actually export iron out of the liver and allows us to actually move iron around. So a lot of people who are iron deficient anemia may actually have low copper. And so liver is a great source of copper. And that's why consuming liver is very important because it's difficult to get bioavailable copper unless you're consuming things like oysters, which actually have their own risks in eating oysters, obviously, from certain contamination perspectives.
Interesting. So how much can you improve athletic performance by eating, the way that you suggest?
Well, I mean, what's been clinically studied is, without question, is preloading with salt and fluids. And
what does that do?
Essentially, so the main problem if you are performing vigorous exercise or you're in a UFC fight, when you perform at a VO2 max of 70% or higher, or even 64% or higher, which is kind of considered vigorous performance, you have a decrease in blood volume feeding the heart because your blood is flowing to the skeletal muscle. And then you also have to increase blood flow to the skin to dissipate heat. So you have competition between blood flow to the heart and working skeletal muscle, as well as the skin. So this drops blood volume feeding the heart by 8 to 10%. So if you preload with salt and fluids before you go into a fight, you're going to boost your blood volume optimally 8 to 10% to prevent the 8 to 10% drop that occurs within 5 minutes of, let's say, in a fight.
Why does that? Is it because like adrenaline? Why does it drop off like that?
So basically what you have is you have blood flowing from basically the heart now to the working skeletal muscle and to the skin. So there's competition between blood. And so there's a decrease in blood volume feeding the heart. And that's why you have to basically get ahead of the problem, boost your blood volume to compensate for the competition in blood flow between the heart, the working skeletal muscle, and the skin to dissipate heat.
So this salt and water, basically, is that what you're saying? That's almost like illegal blood doping is kind of what it sounds like, right? Like that's why people blood dope is to increase their blood volume, right? Isn't it the same type of thing? But this is legal.
Yeah, I think, are you referring to like erythropoietin, like EPO, like increasing red blood cell count?
No, like some people will just take like additional blood. Like, yeah. I mean, now EPO's replaced that, but yeah. But adding blood to, increasing your blood volume.
Exactly. Well, so here's the thing, right? If you look at an untrained person, an average female has about 4 liters of blood. Average man has about 5 liters. If you are an elite athlete, you can have 40% more blood volume. You can have 7 liters, and really, really high performing rowers can have 10 liters. So the body's main mechanism to basically adapt to exercise is to dramatically boost blood volume. And that's the key. That's the crux to a lot of people's performance that tanks during vigorous exercise is they haven't boosted their blood volume prior to performance.
How soon prior do you have to do it?
So the study showed between 90 and 105 minutes prior is when you want to start these high salt solutions. And you want to get the concentration optimally close to the concentration of the saltiness of blood.
90 minutes before a competition. So right before.
So like basically an hour and a half to an hour and 45 minutes prior, you want to slowly start drinking these solutions over about 30 to 60 minutes. And you want to add an amino acid called glycine, which is the smallest amino acid. It helps us form collagen, but it has 3 benefits. It improves the absorption of sodium. It reduces muscle cramps, and it cools the body down. It decreases core body temperature. And that's actually how it helps you fall asleep, is strictly due to the decrease in core body temperature. So a lot of people take glycine for sleep. It doesn't knock you out. It has nothing to do with that. It doesn't put you to sleep. It simply reduces core body temperature. So adding glycine at about 4 to 8 grams, depending on how much salt you're consuming, is going to basically enhance that blood volume expansion.
I find that interesting because, for UFC, like for the fight, everything now over the past, I would say 3-4 years, as far as like after you cut weight, you make weight, and then that whole day. So say you weigh in Friday morning, everything from Friday, as soon as you step off the scale for the next couple hours, is planned so much. But I always kind of think, I'm like, when I wake up on fight day, you're kind of like on your own. And I was like, wait, I feel like I'm always heading that point. I have breakfast in the morning, and then in the afternoon, I'm like, I feel like I should eat again, but I don't really know what to do. And I feel like everything is just replenishing from the weight cut. But then when it comes to fight day, which is like the most important thing, we're kind of like left in the dark. And I'm like, I don't I did so much technical things the past like
For 8 weeks.
8 weeks that on the fight day, it's like, oh, what do you want for breakfast? And I'm like, well, I don't know. What can I eat? Or like, what should I? And I'm definitely not taking any supplements on fight day. And like, even just you saying that, I was like, wait, I feel like I should be doing that before, not before training, but before the fight, you know?
I never would think that 90 minutes before anything would have an impact on what you ate. Anything could positively impact you. Of course, negative if you eat like, you know, a pint of ice cream 90 minutes before, you're not going to do well. But I would have never thought that 90 minutes would be something beneficial could come of that quickly. I would think that it wouldn't even be like in your system yet.
Yeah, no, because if you get the solution correct, if you're matching blood concentration, you basically absorb fluid probably within 30 minutes, and then it takes a little bit of time, like another 30 minutes to expand the blood volume. So after 60 minutes, you've reached pretty close to peak, and then 90 minutes really gets you to the perfect amount of time.
So how much, say, for someone who weighs 150 pounds, like how much water and salt should they be?
I would say at least 3,000 milligrams of sodium and about 26 ounces of fluid. And you
26. Oh, not a ton.
Yeah, 26 ounces, that's, you know, it's less than a liter of fluid, but that's personally, I think that's the minimum. I honestly think that about 4,300 milligrams of sodium, which is about just under 2 teaspoons of salt in a full liter of fluid, is actually probably the optimal amount.
So now if you're in a sport like wrestling where you compete, like could sometimes 4 times in a day, 5 times in a day, you would do the same thing 90 minutes prior to all the matches, or just at the beginning of the day?
So it depends how much fluid and salt you've lost throughout the day. But basically, these regimens have been shown to keep blood volume elevated for about 4 hours. So,
okay. Oh, wow. So maybe do it twice throughout the day.
Yeah, you can. So I would say if it's been over 4 hours, you may want to redo that regimen.
Right. So yeah, that's interesting. So hydration and salt, that's your biggest thing for improving performance the day of.
Yeah, because I'll give you an example of what it does. So, you know, one of the best quote unquote evidence-based supplements is called beta-alanine. But a
lot of people love that.
A lot of people love beta-alanine. It increases something called carnosine in the body, which helps to buffer acid, and acidosis can inhibit performance. But that only increases your ability to exercise maybe a minute longer during vigorous exercise. Mm-hmm. This clinical study showed that if you get the salt dosing correct, you can exercise up to 21 minutes longer. So you can increase your endurance by about 50% in the heat and probably about 25% at normal ambient temperatures.
That seems crazy.
Especially too, even for, I mean, not just performance for that, but for performance for training. I'm kind of like big on when I'm in camp making every training session count, you know, whereas what I kind of see when I'm around other people high level, whether it's jiu-jitsu or UFC, they train hard and they do everything, but then they just focus on the day of the fight, where like, you know, what for me, for my meal plans, when I have them set up, I'm like, make sure I eat one of my meals 30 minutes before my workout. Cause I'm like, well, that will fuel me for my workout. I'll be able to go harder and train a little bit better. Where some people are just like, oh, well, when I get home or whatever, I'll eat. I'm like, well, shouldn't you do it like fuel for the workout? Like, you're already doing that meal. So I feel like timing, I don't know enough about it, but I feel like timing of like when you eat or supplements for your workout is super important, not just for the day of competition, but for training. So, you know, just to prevent injury or just to get the most out of training. If I'm going there, I want to perform. I don't want to just go through the motions. I want to perform as best as I can so I can improve. And then by the day of the fight, you know, do better.
Totally. So there's two ways that I think hydrating and consuming, let's say, food makes sense. Essentially, if you want to increase your performance later on, then during training camp, you don't always want to be taking such high amounts of salt and fluid. You actually want to practice what's called dehydration acclimation. So you induce mild dehydration during your training.
And then feel better when you're hydrated. It'll noticeably better, right?
Yeah. So after you do multiple dehydration acclimation training sessions, your body will adapt to that and expand baseline plasma volume. And then on competition day, you do the really high doses of salt and fluid. But if you have low energy and you have to train well, you should probably consume about 2,000 milligrams of sodium and about 20 ounces of fluid 90 minutes before training camp. So that's not going to give you a huge boost in blood volume, but it's going to give you enough to where you're going to feel good and you can at least perform good in training camp.
So like those days when you're like, I'm really tired today. I just don't feel like doing it. I kind of want to I want to take a day off, but I'm just being a little lazy. Those are the days where you would say maybe increase the intake.
Yeah, I would say like 2,000 milligrams of sodium, which is just under a teaspoon of salt, and 20 ounces of fluid. Add 4 grams of glycine. Slowly consume that over 30 minutes, 90 minutes before your training.
I don't think we have glycine.
Mm-mm.
We have glycine.
I know. That's why I was like, we don't have that.
So we'll get glycine.
I'm such a sucker too. Like, I'm like, I know that I don't know enough information about this. So if someone tells me something, I'm like, okay, I'll take it. I'm like, whatever,
So I saw something that you posted recently, and it was the top 10 athletic performance boosters. And salt and water was number 1, which obviously we've been talking about for a while. Then it says cold therapy. So how do you implement the cold therapy? Just after training sessions, or is there anything like cooling your body prior to competing or training that is beneficial? I've seen things where people cool their palms or cool their head, and it increases their, capacity to work out.
It does. So there's special areas of the skin on the body called glabrous skin. They contain special blood vessels called AVAs, arteriovenous anastomoses. They have large diameter. They can dilate very well, and they bypass the capillaries. So they can bring in cold directly from the venous supply right to the arterial supply and cool the body off extremely quickly. So a lot of UFC fighters do this incorrectly. Like they'll, their coaches will be like basically putting an ice pack on the back of their neck or their chest.
In between rounds, you're saying?
What you want to do in between rounds. Okay. Because that's not glabrous skin. Glabrous skin can cool the body off twice as good as non-glabrous skin. So you want to cool the face, the palms of the hands, or the bottoms of the feet. Now this can be...
Well, the palms have gloves on the fights, right? So that would be tough.
Yeah.
This is, you can do this pre-fight. You can pre-cool the body doing this. But yes, during a fight...
But don't you want to be warm before you fight? Like, what's... Because most people like to be sweating before they compete, not cold, right?
It depends on the fighter and what they prefer. So I know there's some athletes that don't want to do that because they want to. You still do a 10-minute warm up after you do a pre-cooling session. So it's something that you can try out. You can basically do a pre-cooling protocol. It's covered in the book, and see how you do in training camp. I personally don't like to cool like the Achilles tendons or anything like that. I just like to cool using water, like cold water or cool water. It doesn't have to be super cold. You just basically put your palms of your hands in cool water, bottoms of the feet. The more glabrous skin that you do at the same time will cool you quicker. But essentially you do that for like 30 minutes and you'll drop your core temperature by about 0.5 degree. And that gives you basically a larger tank to soak up the heat. And so it takes longer in training camp to hit a critical core temperature so you can exercise longer.
Oh, interesting. So it's not like a cold therapy where people use like ice baths or cryo for like anti-inflammation. This is to get you colder. What's that?
Yeah, you don't want to do like a cold.
You don't want to do that. That's for like recovery. Or you shouldn't. Should you do that ever?
So, cold bath is really good if you're in a training camp and you need to recover quickly. That's an ice bath, which is 59 Fahrenheit or less. And so that's, if you do that for like 3 minutes after a hard training session, that's going to improve power output out to 96 hours. So that's really important if you're in training camp. But if you want to pre-cool the body, you want to use like cool water between 64 and 84 Fahrenheit. And that way you're not cooling the body off too much, which can actually inhibit performance if you don't get it right.
Right. Yeah, of course. But yeah, so getting your core temperature down, you think just 0.5 degree makes a big difference.
Yeah, the studies show that the goal is 0.54 degrees Fahrenheit, or which is 0.3 degrees Celsius drop.
And then you've mentioned heat acclimation. How does that help you?
Basically, so it's similar to dehydration acclimation. basically going into the sauna every single day for like 2 weeks after a training session is going to dehydrate you further. And basically how the body adapts to this is it increases baseline blood volume. It dilutes the sweat, so you lose less electrolytes out of your sweat. And when you have a more dilute sweat, it evaporates quicker. So you literally cool down faster if you're in a fight, if you're heat acclimated. And your threshold for sweating increases.
So this is like an everyday practice, the heat acclimation.
Yeah.
Going to the sauna every day.
It's essentially after a workout, you would go into a sauna for maybe 20 to 30 minutes. You want to try to hit a core temperature, if you're able to measure your core temperature, of 101.3. And you do that for about 2 weeks in a row. And essentially, most of the benefits will remain for another 2 weeks as long as you are still exercising.
It's so funny that you say this because there you're explaining like the science behind it, but when I was wrestling, there was really not a lot of nutrition talk or performance science, it seems, like even 15 years ago. But I was at the Olympic Training Center in 2006, 7, 8, and Terry Brands was the coach at the time, and like a week prior to major competitions, he'd always do like crazy sauna stuff. He would call it like a Russian sauna. We would stay in the sauna for like an hour at a time, and like just crazy. I was like, this seems nuts, like a week out, but maybe he was ahead of his time. I think he was just doing it as like a mental toughness thing, but
yeah, I think you got to be, you do have to be careful with sauna close to competition. I mean, some people have to do it to make weight. And so as long as you get the rehydration strategy correct and you get all the salt and fluids back, you might be okay. But sauna is fatiguing. So there's a bit risk balance, especially the day before competition going into the sauna.
Right.
That's like, I mean, for the UFC, they're kind of big on like the nutritionists there telling us, to do, get in the sauna, or even if it's just a hot bath, like the 2 weeks before to get used to it. But for me, I was just they're like, oh, it'll help you sweat more. They don't explain into details because probably none of us will understand it or even ask. They're just like, all right. Like for me, I'm like, I know you're smarter than me, so tell me what to do. I trust you, So they tell us to sweat more. It'll help you like sweat more. So I know like usually, and for me though, I kind of do the heat acclimation just for mentally preparing myself for when I'm cutting weight. I don't want the first time I go in a sauna to be, the night before weigh-ins when I have to lose like 6-7 pounds and I'm dehydrated. So I kind of, just introduce myself into it slowly. I do like the hot yoga. I'll go in the sauna after my cardio sessions and then the hot tub. But I make sure like 2 weeks before I do that just so then it's not more for me for a mental thing. But then I think it's supposed to help you keep sweating, which will help you cut more weight. But I think I typically,
you always start going to like the gym and doing sauna like 2 weeks out.
Yeah, that's why I'm like,
that's funny because it's without you saying any. This was before she ever heard it from you.
Yeah,
she kind of already did that.
But it was more for the mental aspect, and then when I kind of learned, I'm like, oh, it's good. It'll help you sweat. I'm like, all right, cool. Like it kind of motivated me to keep doing it.
Right. I like maybe starting sauna maybe 3 weeks out, doing it for 2 weeks every day, and then stopping for a full week. That way you're not fatigued from it. But you got to kind of figure out what works for you. And then two things I wanted to kind of cover. So if you don't like the pre-cooling and you're in a fight, then make sure you have a cold pack on the face. If you can do both the forehead and the cheeks and you just press it and hold it there.
During the fight.
During the fight. If you don't want to pre-cool the body and you don't want to mess around with that, you can cool yourself in between rounds by basically having like a you don't necessarily want an ice pack if it doesn't have to be super cold, but you do want it to be cold, and you just keep it on the forehead and keep it on the cheeks. That's the good glabber skin that'll help cool you down, and you just kind of keep it there as long as you can in between rounds.
In that 1 minute, it would make a difference.
It would 100% will, yes.
Yeah.
It's funny because they always put the ice, like you said, on your chest or your back of your neck. And I never like understood that, but like in the moment, I don't even notice it. And I think it was maybe after my last fight, one of my most recent fights, I forget, one of the cornermen were like, was it okay where I was putting the ice? I'm like, oh, I didn't even know you. I didn't even know you put it there. Like, guys, I always kind of wonder, I'm like, why do they put ice on your chest? Like, I don't know. I just kind of, I felt like sometimes you just see people, a lot of things with fighting, you just see
I think a lot of times people are hurting a lot worse than you. You're pretty calm and cool throughout the fight.
Yeah.
So I don't think it needs to be like as dramatic.
Yeah.
But some people need it. You could tell they're overheating.
Yes. Right. And I think what's interesting is like, if you have a fever, right, what did your mom do? She would put a cold cloth on your forehead, not on your chest. Now, I think a lot of coaches do this because they think they're cooling down the heart. But that's not, you don't cool down the heart through the skin. You cool it down by cooling down the blood that's flowing into the heart. And the best way to cool the blood down is, again, through those areas that have those special blood vessels to then cool the blood. And then you're going to cool the heart sort of indirectly.
That's like now they have, when you cut weight, they have like those little sauna boxes where your head's sticking out, you know? And I'm always like, oh, this is great because I can stay in here all day as long as my head's out. Like they don't. Sometimes people complain. They're like, oh, well, they don't get as hot as a regular sauna. I'm like, yeah, but I can stay in it for longer because if my head's out, I'm like, I could stay in there, you know, all day.
What's interesting too, Caitlin, is that actually a hot bath, even though your head is out, is probably one of the best ways to quickly lose weight because not only does water conduct heat 2 to 4 times better than air, but because your head is out, it basically increases the loss of salt and fluid out the urine as well. So not only are you increasing sweating in a hot tub or a hot bath, but you actually lose salt and fluids. It's like a non-doping diuretic by actually being in a bath.
Right. Yeah,
The only problem with the bath, I got long legs, so sometimes I'm like, can't get. It's really great until the night before weigh-ins, I get a little cranky and I'm like, my legs don't fit in it. But I feel like I'm the outlier. Most fighters seem to be doing bath.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now the other thing that you've mentioned in that list was creatine. I take creatine. I think that I'm not a big believer in a lot of supplements. I never really notice anything, but aside from taking testosterone, creatine is the only thing that like I've noticed like it definitely helps with performance, I think, with strength, explosion.
Yesterday was the first.
She took creatine for the first time.
First time yesterday. I'm like, all right, I'm gonna start my creatine journey. I don't know anything about it, but I'm just like, I feel like I should be taking it. You really like it.
Yeah,
so.
I think it's the only supplement other than like, you know, testosterone that I've ever taken that I notice a difference.
I'm part of like the girl team that's like, oh my God, am I gonna get too bulky if I take it?
Is she gonna get
and
bulky?
Everyone like rolls their eyes, and I feel like I say that to guys. They're like, I wish it would work that well. Like, you know, it's not gonna happen.
So why does it improve athletic performance?
Creatine is actually really good at hydrating the cell. So it actually holds on to water in the cell. And that's important, right? Because your muscle is like 75% water. So if you can increase the hydration of your muscle, that's going to improve performance. It improves power output. It's actually even good for cognition. So I don't know if you ever heard the term methylation, but like basically putting methyl groups on certain compounds in the body is a tremendous energy suck. 50% of our entire methylation is due to forming creatine. So if you can pre-take creatine, your methylation needs go down dramatically. So it definitely is one of the most evidence-based supplements in regard to increasing power output, increases glycogen resynthesis as well.
So now you've always talked about creatine monohydrate in your book, but what's the one I have?
No, it's Alkaline? KRE dash. I forget what it was.
Alkaline or something.
Alkaline, I think.
You know that one? Are you familiar with that?
He got that and I looked it up. I'm like, no one knows what this is. This is the creatine that you bought. No one knows. I'm like, I looked it up. I'm like, I can't really find much information. I think we need to get it.
Gregor told me to take.
Oh, he probably doesn't know much about it either.
One. I'll show you. Afterwards. I'll ask you about it. I'll send you the picture. Maybe I'm saying it wrong. But yeah, that's something that I'm a big believer in. I think that it definitely helps. So that's a good supplement.
And girls shouldn't be scared to take it.
No, totally not. They should not. It takes typically, if you're doing about 3 to 5 grams every day, it takes about 4 weeks to fully saturate the muscles with creatine. So you want to give yourself a good, 4 weeks to get the full benefits from it.
And you shouldn't be worried about like if you're cutting weight, like taking that.
I guess if you're really that close, like where like every pound matters, maybe you can start coming off of it a little bit, but then you're going to kind of reduce some of the gains from it. So I think if you can stay on the creatine and still make the weight, I think it will help with performance.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's why when I was going to start taking it and I was in camp, and for some reason I'm like, I was like, I'm just going to wait till after my fight to start taking it, just to, you know what I mean? Just so I didn't have to worry about it. Cause I cut a lot of weight. So.
Okay. Right.
So how about, if you're in like something with like WADA or USADA and you can't take, like testosterone, do you think, is there ways, I know that people say like, you know, certain saturated fats and stuff. Is there ways that nutrition could, substantially increase testosterone?
Yeah, I mean, definitely eating animal based is going to increase your testosterone. Decreasing insulin resistance is going to increase your testosterone. Lowering your body fat is going to improve testosterone because it decreases aromatase, which is an enzyme that basically lowers testosterone levels, increases estrogen. And so there are
soy boys.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think, natural ways to increase testosterone comes down to basically just being lean, growing muscle, getting morning sunlight, getting good sleep are all important ways to boost testosterone. Certain supplements may help. Inositol, or myo-inositol, which is the actual active ingredient, has been shown to increase testosterone in men by about 23%. So there's potentially supplements like berberine too may have some testosterone boosting, but that's probably due to the improvement in insulin sensitivity from those compounds.
Yeah, I was actually surprised because in your book, when I was thinking, there's definitely going to be a section on testosterone. There kind of really wasn't. Do you think that, is it not the most important thing? A lot of people think it's like it's everything.
Right. No, I don't think that. I think the most important thing, well, it depends on what you're talking about, but blood volume is by far the most important.
For performance.
It's going to touch preloading with salt and fluid, not even close, because that gives you a 25 to 52% increase in how long you can vigorously exercise. Nothing's going to come close to that. Pre-cooling, cooling, heat acclimation, that can get you maybe 20%. Typically 8 to 20% increase in how long you can vigorously exercise, but the salt's going to get you 25 to 50%. And boosting your testosterone, I don't know how much that's really going to do.
No. Yeah, I don't know. You hear a lot about it. Maybe that's just like meathead, like jiu-jitsu guys and stuff. But you always hear about test.
Well, I think that's because I feel like it's just easier. Oh, here, just take tests, you'll feel better. But it's not that easy it's easier for people to take like, a shot of test than to prepare. It sounds insane, but I feel like that's probably easier for most people than preparing, water and salt 90 minutes before their workout. Yeah, which to me, it's like, wait, this is not that big of a deal. Yeah, like
taking an injection and just like taking a pill, like to lower your blood pressure is easier than changing your diet, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I mean, I think one thing too that a lot of fighters are missing is training functional movements with resistance. So, like, for example, I've been able to double my punching power using tonal. Now, tonal doesn't say like you should throw punches with their machine, but that's what I do. And I increase my punch power from 14 pounds to now I can punch with 28 pounds. And I throw uppercuts, hooks, jabs, overhands, everything with it. And I mean, it strengthens everything, because if you're actually doing the movement of throwing a punch, then your legs are involved, your lower back is involved. I really don't understand. I would never, knowing what I know now and training on like resistance machines while throwing punches, I can't even fathom going into a fight not being trained on a machine like that, because your punching power is going to go up so much. And it's important to have that knockout power, especially if you don't have good endurance.
Yeah, well, if you don't have good endurance, yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's interesting, that resistance. Usually you don't think of resistance training with like punching power, because a lot of like times, well, it's like Teddy Atlas has a famous quote, is like, it's not if weightlifting affects your boxing, it's how much weightlifting negatively affects your boxing. Like, he's like, the old school boxing mentality was no weight training.
They're like, if you lift weights,
you will not be able to fight.
You're going to get slow.
That was like, Teddy Atlas has a famous quote about that.
That's somewhat true if you're just lifting weights. I'm talking about physically, like being on resistance machines and throwing punches with resistance. And I'll tell you, your punches will absolutely get faster and stronger. What's interesting is I have a theory on Ngannou, why his punches are so strong, is because he has 19,000 hours of basically digging sand back, before he became a fighter. And when you dig, like if you shovel sand or you shovel snow, what are you doing? You're increasing your lower back, and then you're increasing basically the strength of your shoulder. If you throw it,
that rotation too of dumping it over, that's like rotation on the punches, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I do a lot of strength training where I have I'm holding on to the tonal, and I'm like going from low to high, like where
yeah.
Mm-hmm. I've seen people do that with like landmine exercises and bands. I've seen a lot of that. Yeah, that's good stuff.
That's like it's the simplest thing, but one of my things that I do a lot and I like is just shadow boxing with like 2-pound dumbbells.
Yeah,
it's like so simple and you could do it anywhere. And I'm like, dude, that makes me, I feel when I do that, and then when I take them down, I'm like, that makes me feel so fast. I'm like, even if it's just, I was like, I don't know, this definitely, I feel like it helps. I'm like, whether it's, just mentally or not, I'm like, I feel so much faster when I do that.
100%, but I'm telling you, I do both. And I'm telling you right now, if you have a resistance machine, there's different machines, not just tonal, that has the ability to do this.
Yeah.
You're going to see that you're going to increase the strength of everything. So when you're holding the weights with let's say you have like 2-pound dumbbells, you're going to increase a lot, mostly like shoulders and arms and back. But if you have like the resistance machine, it requires the whole body to pull against it. So you actually increase the strength all the way down from let's say your ankles all the way up, which is super important. I've even started increasing the strength of my tips. You know what I mean? Because that's where your base is. That's foundational.
Yeah, a lot of people talk about that.
Yeah. And knee strength too. So really, I don't know, I've started to train in some interesting ways to improve my performance.
Yeah, I've done some of that stuff too, because it was always like keep your back on your heels and don't let your knee go over your toe. But now a lot of that is like let your knee go way over your toe to get that ankle flexibility. And yeah, there's a lot of that. Yeah, I've been doing a little bit like that too. Yeah, it's interesting stuff.
The knees over toe guy, he makes a lot of sense, and
he does.
Focuses on training the tibs and yes, getting the knee way over the toe, and it's gonna suck at first, and your knees are gonna kill you for a couple of weeks. But then the adaptations to that, your knees are gonna be so much stronger, and then that's gonna help your kicks.
Yeah, it's interesting.
One thing I wanted to ask you about, because I saw you posted about melatonin, and I've been kind of concerned because I'm like,
she's addicted to melatonin.
I have like a problem. And I would say about 2-3 years ago, I used to be like a late night person, stay up late, and I would always have to take a nap during the day. And then like when people started talking about sleep and how beneficial it is, pretty much when I stopped, I used to, at first, even my first couple fights in the UFC, I was bartending. So some nights I was up till 4 a.m, and then I had to train at 10. So I had no choice. But then when I transitioned into just training full time, I was like, I feel like I shouldn't be awake at like 1 a.m. I don't know. And then I wake up, I just don't always have to take a nap. And so I tried to switch my sleeping habits. And then I would take, when I was in camp, I'd take melatonin at 9 p.m., go to sleep by like 9:30, 10. And it was like great. And I totally changed my sleeping routine where I can go to sleep early and go to sleep earlier, wake up earlier. And but I do think I take I can fall asleep without melatonin, but I prefer it. I don't know if it's like psychological. And then I saw that someone saying it wasn't like good for like your hormones to be taking it at a high dose. I take like 20 milligrams every night. And someone said that like you shouldn't be taking like that much every night. Is that bad? I was under the impression like, well, melatonin, I'm not taking like ZQuil, like I was like, oh, I thought it was natural. I'm good,
Yeah, I don't think there's sort of a debate on should you not. There's not any good evidence that taking
Huberman is really against melatonin. I don't know if you're familiar with
Yeah, I know who he is. I think probably the best way, and the reason why he is because if you get adequate morning sunlight, it sets the melatonin release earlier and it's more dramatic. So the best way to do, to get your melatonin is really through morning sunlight by setting your circadian rhythms.
So maybe focus more on that to kind of wean off of it as much.
Yeah, but see, this is what's crazy about UFC fighters is you almost have to be like a night owl, right? Because you have to fight at night, which is crazy. And if you're used to like going to bed early, like now you have to switch over and be ready to fight at like 10 at night or whatever, midnight.
Yeah. Luckily for me, I've been fighting since like COVID. Most of my fights were in Vegas, so I'm like kind of fighting earlier there, so I don't have to worry about it. But last year when I fought in Abu Dhabi, I woke up there. I had to be in the lobby to get my hands wrapped at like, no, I think it was like 2:30 a.m. or 3 a.m., something like that. And I'm fighting at like 4. And I was like, okay, I don't really know what to do. And then I remember during fight week at the hotel, I'd be like, where is everyone? They're like, well, they're trying to switch their sleep schedules because they're trying to sleep, to adjust to that time. I was like, yeah,
That's hard.
But the thing is, I was like, yeah, but then they were struggling and everyone was miserable because then they were stressed out because they couldn't change in that short amount of time to the time difference. And then the problem with that is the day before the fight, we have weigh-ins. So it's like, to me, I was like, I need to make weight and feel good and be there and then figure it out, because I can't be, if you got your sleep schedule to match up the day before, you would ruin it by having to be up for weigh-ins and cutting weight. So it was kind of like either way, one or the other probably wasn't that great. So I just was kind of like, all right, I'm not stressing. I'm just going to sleep when I'm tired and figure it out. I think for me, if I like thought about it too much, I would have like got a little stressed out, and I don't think that would have been good. But
Right.
But you don't think it's a big issue to take? If you want to take it, you take it.
I have never seen any really compelling data that it's.
Let's go.
I mean, there's good studies.
I gotta up my dosage. No.
20 milligrams has actually been studied in many cancer studies, showing that there's benefits in actually reducing cancer incidence and death. Melatonin, because it's a dramatic systemic antioxidant. I can't say that the melatonin cures anything, but I can tell you what the studies and what the meta-analyses, which is basically how they aggregate all studies, show benefits in cancer patients with 20 milligrams of melatonin a night. And there's been a couple studies too in COVID patients where melatonin may have benefits as well. So if there is a supplement to take,
probably why I didn't have COVID that bad. I had COVID twice, and I had it like a week before fight week, so 2 weeks before my last fight. And then I had it in the beginning of like my fight before that camp, but I didn't have it that bad, so it was fine. Maybe it was the melatonin.
Yeah, it could be.
Because Kyle had it bad, and he doesn't take melatonin.
I had it really bad. Yeah.
I want to put
totally
that.
different.
I don't want to put that false information. But what I do want to say is like the one thing like I feel like that has helped me over the last couple years, and it seems so simple. And in the beginning, I kind of was like, I mean, it's not that big of a deal, but I think is sleep and how important that is for my training. And I mean, since I started doing that, when I'm in camp, I'm pretty strict with it. Like that's kind of like my non-negotiable. Like I have to get my sleep, and I wake up really early in the morning. Like some days, on Tuesdays I train. I live in Long Island. I train in New Jersey, so I wake up. I leave the house at like 4:50. So I have to wake up at like 4:30. So it's like I have to go to sleep, and it's like it doesn't matter. I can't train at night the night before because I have to sleep.
I think sleep too is like you can't really perform at a high level if you're not sleeping good. I don't think. I think it's like some people don't eat, like they don't worry about nutrition. I don't know if you're familiar with Gary Tonin, but his whole shtick is he's like the best jiu-jitsu guy in the world, but he fights in 1FC, but his is the Gary Tonin diet, and he eats like gas station food and Five Guys, and he's shredded and like just a total freak.
Mm-hmm.
I think you could get by on eating that for a little bit, but no one could not sleep and perform at a high level. I don't think.
No, totally. Yeah. Sleep is gonna one night of poor sleep is gonna just completely ruin your workout. Whereas, like you said, you can fight and compete even on a junk diet for at least a little bit.
Yeah.
And I think,
and if that's what you're used to, you almost do better. Like if you always eat junk and then the week of the fight you switch to steak and kale, you're gonna be like, oh, I'm starving. You won't be able to, if you're not used to it.
Right. And then Caitlin, to get back to your other question too about like, should I eat before training to be metabolically flexible, which is essentially burning both, becoming a good fat burner, but also becoming a good glucose burner. It's important to train in both a fasted state and then also a fed state. So typically you want to consume complex carbs an hour before. So 30 minutes, that's a little too close. It's food still going to sit in your.
What do you like for complex carbs?
Vitargo is one of the best if you're taking like the UFC is pretty familiar with Vitargo.
Yeah. Tony Ricci got me. I used to, when he was living here, he got me on that for a while. and then the UFC.
But what about
strength.
not like complex carbs that are decent for you, that not supplements? Any foods that you like?
Maple syrup, orange juice, fruits, potatoes, things like that, like an hour prior. That's going to actually help cap your muscle glycogen, because you basically, in vigorous exercise, you can drop your muscle glycogen by like 33% in just a few minutes. So by having the carbs on board, you're going to recap those depleted glycogen stores. But you want to train in also a fasted state, and here's why. The reason is because you're going to learn how to burn fat for fuel better. It's going to help spare glycogen when you need it for anaerobic performance, and you're going to train. It's just a better way to train. And so being metabolically flexible in training both a fasted state and a fed state is just going to lead to better overall metabolic adaptations.
And so maybe, like, I don't know if this makes sense. I would think if I'm going to do both of that, like say my jujitsu sessions, I maybe could do my jujitsu sessions. I could maybe do fasted, but like my sparring sessions, sparring and wrestling sessions for me are the toughest. So I feel like maybe those I wouldn't go fasted, but the other ones that are like, you know, a little bit less intense at certain points, I think those would be the better ones to go fasted. Is that right?
Yeah, and it's all about like how good you feel coming into your training. So if you feel pretty good, like on that day, maybe you go fasted. Maybe you just feel good and you do okay. And you're going to get better metabolic adaptations too by being fasted, because it's a more difficult state. It's putting your body under more pressure, and you'll adapt to that and get the benefits from that adaptation.
Aside from performance or like high functioning athletes like Caitlin or UFC fighters, I don't see you say much about like fasting, like long-term fasting. I haven't seen you put out a ton on that. How do you feel about it?
Like fasts really longer than 2 days, simply because the body goes under mild metabolic acidosis. You can offset that by consuming like sodium citrate or sodium bicarbonate and things like that.
So what about like a weekly? I've been doing for like the last 5 weeks, I do one 24-hour fast in the week. And I've been feeling great about with that.
Yeah, I think if you keep it to 24 hours or less, and you don't do it more than once a week, and you're making sure to consume adequate protein throughout that week, maybe even actually ramping it up a bit because of the day you're missing, then most people should be okay.
Yeah, I felt really good with that. I never did it before, but now I'm kind of into that. I'll eat like Sunday night, I'll eat my dinner, and then I won't eat again until Monday night, 24 hours.
I think you just kind of like a new routine of something.
No, I like it though. I've been feeling really good.
Yeah. He did it one day. He's like, "Oh, I feel so great." I'm like, "You just like that you have like a new thing you do one day a week." You know?
I'm into it.
But I was like, "But what if you feel good?" Then do. I was like, the first day he did, I was like, "All right, I'm gonna do it." And then it was like noon. I was like, "Yeah, I'm not doing it."
So we'll wrap up pretty soon, but I want to just talk about like not just the athletic and performance and stuff like that, but your whole journey. It's like so impressive. But like right now, do you do research still? Or are you primarily just like an author, or what would you say? How do you spend your days?
Yeah, I mean, I still do research and publish, a lot on this topic. So
do you get like grants to do that, or how does that work?
Yeah, no, I don't need a grant. I'm affiliated with St. Luke's Mid-America Heart Institute. So, I publish through that affiliation. I do work with certain fighters as well to improve their performance. So a lot of research, a lot of publishing.
And then your Instagram is obviously you put a lot of time in that. Like, do you have a format you like to use? Like how often you post, or just when you want to?
Yeah, just whenever I feel like it.
And it's all organic.
Yeah,
sharing.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. One other quick, just I'm like, ooh, why have you here? I didn't know if you had an opinion on like, I don't know if this is anything you've looked into, the opinion of like women athletes that are, is there something different they should be doing according to like, their menstrual cycle as far as like supplementing? Because I know they say like during that you're holding on to more water, or you get more, certain times of the month that you should. I didn't know if you knew anything about that there's that we should be doing. Cause I feel like no one talks about that or does anything. The only thing they kind of do, they're like, if it's fight week and they're like, oh, do you have your period this week? They're like, all right, just take more magnesium. That's it. And I'm like, okay. So they're like double up on like magnesium scoops. They say that like helps like water retention. But I didn't know if you had any opinions on that stuff.
Yeah, well, I mean, when you're going through menses, right, and losing blood, you're losing salt and blood volume as well, and you're losing iron. So, the RDA for women for iron is 18 milligrams. It's more than twice that for a male. So, like, red meat is super important because it's very, very high in bioavailable iron. So, spinach. A lot of people think spinach is high in iron, which it is, but the bioavailability is only 2%. Whereas the bioavailability of iron from red meat is 20%, so it's 10 times that.
Okay, wow.
Compared to spinach. So for women, red meat is super important. Salt and fluids are super important, as particularly during menses.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah, but overall, it seems like your message is just like whole food, get your sleep, get sunlight, and you're gonna live a better life. And exercise. You always daily exercise, right? Or 5 days a week.
Yeah.
What?
Well, I guess
I'm not talking athletes. Not talking athletes.
Yeah, I mean, so if you're going close to failure, probably like 4 times a week is a good target to hit.
Yeah.
No, but yeah, we really like your message. I like everything you come out with. So really appreciate having you on.
And I really appreciate the simplicity of your posts, you know, because sometimes
that's the best part.
It can be very overwhelming at first. And then, you know, you think like, you know, if someone goes into too much detail, sometimes even for me, I'm like a high level athlete, but sometimes if it's too much information, I'm like, I don't know, it's overwhelming. I already have enough to worry about with training, but just like the simplicity of things, and it definitely helps.
Even like some of your like contemporaries, I know like Ben Greenfield wrote in your book, the foreword of your book, but like his stuff is more like biohacking. It's a little extreme, I think, for most people. And I think he's cool. I like his stuff, but your stuff is just like so easy. You go to the grocery store and follow your whole plan, right? Do push-ups and, you know, go on a walk, right? It seems like it's easier than jumping into, you know, some of the stuff that Ben Greenfield's doing.
Yes, simple wins most of the time. So
it seems like it. Yeah, we totally agree. But really appreciate you coming on. Everyone, check him out on Instagram. Get his book, Win.
We'll put everything in the captions. We'll put everything how to reach you, and yeah. Thanks for taking the time to talk with us. It's a little intimidating because I'm like, oh my gosh, she's so smart. I don't know anything, but I'm like, all right, I'm just going to ask him whatever questions I want. So I appreciate your time.
Yeah, really appreciate this, James. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.